So another year, another mega Marvel event has come to an end. This one in the form of Judgment Day by Kieran Gillen and Valero Schmidt. I hope I said all of those names properly, but let's get into the review. So, quick warning, I am going to be talking about the details and even the ending of the story. So there's big spoiler warning. If you don't want to know the story's details, then go ahead and tune out now. And then come back after you've read it, and we will be here to discuss it. But for those of you who stayed around, let's begin. So first of all, Judgment Day is kind of this weird crossover born out of the Hellfire Gala when Moira McTaggart infiltrated as Mary Jane, caused a bunch of ruckus, then at the end teleported over to Druig, the evil Eternal, who's not the villain in the Eternal movie for some reason, and basically revealed the secret that mutants share some DNA on a base level with the Deviants. So Druig uses this as an excuse to mobilize the entire Eternal clan to go to war against the mutants of Krakoa, and the Avengers obviously can't let that slide. It's too big of an event, so they just kind of get caught in the middle. So the battle really, there's not a lot the X-Men can do to the Eternals. They're a lot more powerful than they are, especially when Druig reaches into the bowels of the Eternal prison and lets out Uranos, basically Thanos' grandfather, who can take pretty much every mutant on Earth with very little effort, but his use is minimal because they can't let him loose for very long, and they have to keep him to the confines of his prison. So he gets these little kind of work release moments where he goes to like Mars and wipes out the Martian colony that the mutants have started, because the mutant comic books are just nonsensical at this point. And then, you see the rest of the Eternals just converge on Krakoa and just wage open war against the mutants until the X-Men get involved. So Iron Man, Mr. Sinister, and a few others come up with a really great plan of reanimating some of the dead Celestial bits from the Fall of Celestial Avengers storyline from a few years ago, and they create a new Celestial called the Progenitor, who will, in theory, tell the Eternals to stop their war, I guess. Because right now, since there are no Eternals, they're commanded by Eternal Supreme or Eternal Prime, which at this point is in the story is Druig. And this new Eternal shows up, and he basically takes over the role of Ashram the Judge, and he's going to judge the human race literally individually. He's going to judge every human being one at a time, and then depending on how humanity fares as a whole, he'll pass judgment on Earth. And he starts with Captain America, and he gives Captain America a big resounding thumbs down. So if Cap can't pass judgment, then that doesn't bode well for the rest of us, as the rest of the mutants quickly learn. And so sadly, the rest of the story kind of folds into this. So you have this big monolith of a star god who's parked himself on Earth, who's judging people individually, and it's taking him time, obviously, to do this. I mean, he can do like swaths of people at a time, but at the same time, he still can't just judge the human race and be done with it. So it's a lot of the Avengers, the members of the X-Men, and the Eternals that decide to side with humanity against Druig, trying to figure out how to stop this big space god. Iron Man comes up with a way, since he was the one that engineered this thing, that he's got some kind of a node that basically is his life that's in the center of him, and you just take it out and he'll die, and that would end the whole thing. But Ajak of the Eternals basically says, Selma Hayek's character for the movie, for those of you who don't know the comic characters, and I wouldn't blame you, she's against this because it's the equivalent of deicide. You're going to be wasting one of their gods, and she's not going to allow it. We need to find another way, she says. So Iron Man, Mr. Sinister, and a few others are working on how to stop this this rogue Celestial, while the rest of the Avengers and X-Men are kind of doing a bit of crowd control. There's still a little bit of fighting that shows up here and there. A couple Eternals are still listening to Druig, who's still causing some problems, but it gets very fractured. At this point, the story relies very heavily on the tie-in chapters, which I didn't read many of them, and I'm a firm believer that these stories should stand on their own, with tie-ins just serving to add a little flavor if you want to maybe follow the adventures of a character who's not directly involved in the story but still impacted by it, kind of like they used to do back in the Infinity Gauntlet days. But yeah, so a lot of it is just that, and the book kind of delves into these really, I found them kind of tedious eventually, these little pages where it'd be like random vignettes of Mike Jones is walking home from the store, and the progenitor appears to him as his dead grandmother and asks him what he's done with his life, and he says nothing, and then he's failed Ashram's progenitor's test, and he's a thumbs down. And Daredevil gets a vision of Jesus, and Jesus asks if Daredevil is worthy, and Daredevil, of course, says no because he's Catholic, and so he fails the test. I mean, things like that. So you'd have, every now and then it would be a Marvel character, but a lot of the time it was just some rando, and you would hear a little bit about their life and how they were judged. And this book tended to lead very much into the wordy. I think the writer Gillian got a little word heavy on this one. It gets, you just want to turn the page and get back to the action eventually, because there's not a lot of action after about the third issue. It's a lot of it is just strategizing of how do we stop an Eternal until issue 5, when he finally passes judgment. The world is unworthy and it's starting to end. So now the X-Men and the Avengers need to, and the Eternals that are good need to figure out a way to stop him by any means necessary, even if it means going in and destroying the node. Ajax finally agrees that that's the only way to go forward. So they manage to get in. They infiltrated. There's Ashram, or Progenitor, is just ripping the Earth apart, and there's barely 1 billion people left on Earth. A bunch of people are being killed. They're being resurrected on Krakoa, so it really doesn't matter. Captain America gets disintegrated, but the X-Men decide to start resurrecting non-mutants now, so they resurrect Cap and other people. So, I mean, it really doesn't matter. Characters are dying left and right, but they just get brought back to life, so who cares? And Circe finally manages to broadcast to what's left of humanity and spills the Eternal's greatest secret, which is every time an Eternal dies and is resurrected, it costs a human life to do that. So somewhere on Earth, a person dies and the Eternals come back. And now this secret that they've kept all this time is shared with humanity, and now Progenitor is paused because he doesn't know how to judge this. And then Ajax tells him, well, then, you're an unworthy god. I helped create you, and you've let me down, so how do you judge yourself? And he judged himself unworthy, so he just dies and makes Ajax basically god or goddess. And that's kind of it. That's how the story ends. She goes off and reminds everyone else that it's Judgment Day, but before doing that, the Celestial goes to this womb or a spinstool of reality or something, and he's able to reset and undo all the damage he's done. And the a lot of heroes are already resurrected, but now everybody's resurrected except for, I guess, the characters that died directly in conflict with the Celestial. And the X-Men start this thing called the Phoenix Foundation, which is going to be, now they're going to use the Krakoan revival technology on anybody. So now almost everyone's immortal. There's going to be a system to it because they can't resurrect everybody. There's too many people, but there's going to be a lottery, and certain people get preferential treatment, and this and the blah, blah, blah. It got complicated and stupid. The ending was bad. So that's it. That is the plot of Judgment Day. And I have to say, my opinion of this storyline is basically that of everyone on this cover, which is a resounding thumbs down as an event goes. So this was one of those superhero versus superhero events, but, did we really need to see Icarus versus Cyclops and like Bakari versus Wolverine, which we actually didn't get some of the good fights you would have expected. Like, I would have liked to have seen Thena fight Wolverine. That could have been fun. And but the Eternals were overpowered to the X-Men. The X-Men had no response to them, so this was never really a fight. And there were some other little weird Eternal intrigue things involving the Unimind and electing Star Fox as the new Prime Eternal and all this other stuff. But I don't know. It just didn't. None of it mattered, because you have to. I think you have to care a lot more about the Eternals than I do for any of that part of the story to have any kind of impact on you. And that was a really big part of the story, was how the Eternals are going to reconcile this. And, in the end, now that the little secret is spilled to whoever was left alive, now they're like the mutants. They're hated and feared because they know that they're basically a parasitic race that every time they resurrect, a human has to give their life. And, humanity obviously doesn't like that very much. So there's a little scene with Star Fox and Nightcrawler where Nightcrawler's, oh yeah, you're going to get used to being feared and hated for a world that you're trying to defend. That's just kind of par for the course. We've been doing it for years. And and in the end, the Phoenix Foundation is now a thing, so death is even less relevant in the Marvel Universe than it was in the past. It's basically like the mutant comics where it doesn't matter what happens. Everybody can die, but they'll all just be resurrected. It's fine. They even, the onset of this comic, they even killed members of the Five, and they had just a contingency and brought them back to life. So it wasn't, it was like not even a problem. One issue later, that problem was solved. And yeah, I really think that Marvel needs to get a handle on some of these concepts they've introduced into the books. If we're going to go with this everybody's immortal thing, then can we maybe see a downside to that or something? A conflict. I know we've got a Fall of the Mutants type storyline coming up. Maybe this Phoenix Foundation is kind of going to be a part of that, I'm guessing, because that's a pretty big thing to introduce into the Marvel universe, I think. Now we're not just resurrecting mutants, just anybody on Earth can be, but there's a process. So what happens if you're dying and you're not selected as part of the resurrection? And, for all I know, that's probably going to be what that storyline is about. Is some big bad, somebody like Doctor Doom or something is going to get a terminal illness and he's going to demand to be resurrected, but the mutants aren't going to do it because he's not selected. So that's what's going to happen then. Or what if Kang does? Or what if somebody like that, somebody who's really powerful, who can wage this kind of war, demands resurrection and the mutants refuse? What does he do? So, or what does she do, depending on who the character is? But, I don't know. As big events go, this wasn't the worst I've read by far. I've read way worse Marvel events than this, but it wasn't good. It was a lot of talking, a lot of just the writer writing and going off topic a bit with a lot of these little judgment scenes with the human population. I don't think we needed nearly as much of that as we got. It was curious who the main focused characters were too. I mean, Circe and Ajax obviously made sense for the Eternals, but like Mr. Sinister working with Iron Man, I don't understand why Stark would work with him. I mean, I think there's other people that know about Sinister's area of expertise that Iron Man could go to, and Tony Stark he created the progenitor, so he already knew that the solution was already there. He didn't need Sinister to help. The only thing Sinister did was he heard about the little kill me switch that the progenitor had within him, and he betrays the trust of Tony Stark by telling Mystique and Dynasty and all those back on Krakoa that there's a kill me switch. So if worse comes to worse, then they can just override the Avengers and do it themselves, which they ultimately try to do, that's the final straw that causes Earth to fail the test, is Jean Grey decides she's going to just go for the Node, and the Node smacks her down and says, no, I knew this plan was coming, and I knew you would try it because you're self-centered, and so you fail, Jean Grey. I thought he was just kind of weird in there. And then the only kind of interesting thing they do with the resurrection is when Earth is just completely burning, they only have so many eggs left that are prepared to resurrect. So they have to start using it as a bit of a resource. And at one point they even have to say, we need a mission leader. Who do we resurrect, Cap or Cyclops? And they elect to bring Cap back, even the X-Men. So yeah, that's a fun conversation Scott Summers gets to have with the rest of the X-Men when he gets back to life. So you needed a leader, you went with Cap. Okay, that says a lot about my standing in the mutant society. But what did you guys think of Judgment Day? Did anybody out there read it? I didn't read. I did read some of the tie-ins. If they crossed into a book I already collected, I didn't really like. There was a tie-in with Amazing Spider-Man. There was actually a decent one where progenitor, because when he would judge somebody, he would take the form of somebody either from your life or something, the form of an abstract that you respect, like God in the presence of Daredevil. And he came back as Gwen Stacy to Spider-Man to judge him, and that was an interesting character to judge Peter Parker. I would have. I don't, as good as that issue was, I think it would have made more sense if he would have come back as Uncle Ben, because that's the genesis of it. That's the great power gives great responsibility, and Uncle Ben looking back, have you used your power responsibly kind of a thing, probably would have been a better story in my opinion. But the Gwen thing was fine, and since he was found worthy, so he actually resurrected Gwen for a minute so that he could talk to her, and then she was gone. Because this thing's a space god, he manipulates reality. I mean, he undid the entire events of this story at the end. So at the end of the day, like a lot of Marvel events, sadly, this doesn't really have any lasting effects. I assume that Phoenix Foundation will, because I think it's going to lead into the next big thing, but that's just my guess. But what did you guys think? Let's talk about it in the comments below. While you're down there, do all the usual things. Hit like, subscribe if you're not already a subscriber to the channel. I'd love to have you here. We'll talk about pop culture and stuff and do a lot of comic book reviews, or I try to do comic book reviews. I haven't done as many lately, trying to do a few more of them. But yeah, that's it. Let's talk, and I'm looking forward to hear what you think, and I'm going to leave it there. So I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye.